So let's talk about trust. Now, Dave, you've been a passenger in a car that I've driven before.
I have.
So who do you trust more, me or the autonomous driven vehicle?
Well, as much
Tough question, I know.
No, as good of a driver as you are, the reality is, well, I don't know. I guess this is the thing that is so disconcerting for a lot of people. I think when I'm in your car, I trust you. If I was the one that was driving, I would certainly trust myself, right? But I think for a lot of people, we just have a question of this completely autonomous, non-human actor, and not singular either. You know, like potentially thousands of these non-human actors that are going to be out there with these large vehicles roaming around. The reality is, I think that I would probably want to trust you more because you're my friend and I know you. But I think empirically, I believe that it's probably a lot safer with a host of autonomous vehicles that are out there.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think a lot of the research as we have it now demonstrates and leads to the fact that overall things will probably be safer as more and more autonomous vehicles are on the road. But why do so many people, or why do you think so many people are so resistant to that?
Well, I mean, I think I'm going to flip around and ask you, right? Because trust is a big part of what we're talking about, right? And it's the fundamental, I guess, foundation for so much of this ethics conversation. And do we over-trust ourselves? Do we under-trust technology? Or is it the other way around? Like, are we rushing so quickly into these technologies without really understanding whether or not we should be trusting them?
Yeah, so I think two things off the top of my head. One is, you know, as humans, we tend not to trust things that we don't understand.
Right.
Right. And so I think that plays a lot into it of, hey, I don't understand how this exactly works, so I'm going to distance myself from this, or I'm going to be suspicious of it until I do understand how it works. I think there's a lot of that. Two, I think this idea of overconfidence, right? As, again, as humans, we tend to be more overconfident of our own ability than we probably should be. And there's been tons of tests that have been done where that's been shown, right? And I think the combination of those two things of, hey, I'm actually not that bad of a driver anyway, so it should be okay. Plus, I don't understand what's going on in this car with no driver. Those two things kind of collide, I think, amongst humanity or mankind to kind of create this situation where, like, hey, maybe I'm resisting to this change.
Yeah. So from the perspective of trust, I think you kind of hit on what we discussed earlier from a culture lag perspective, right? For a lot of people, they're going to be very comfortable kind of continuing in that perceived safe method of travel when in actual fact the numbers maybe don't bear that out, and they'd be willing to persist with a situation where they're the driver rather than going into a potentially safer autonomous vehicle. And I think this gets to another interesting point that is often a criticism of the trolley problem in the first place, is that it presents this binary, almost illogical situation where you have to choose between one person dying or 5 people dying or some really fantastic situation, when that's probably not the case at all.
And it's not reflective of real life.
Certainly not reflective of real life. And so I guess my question for you, from an autonomous driving vehicle perspective, an AI perspective, I think one of the real reasons why people in this industry are saying you should trust autonomous vehicles more is because they can communicate with each other kind of seamlessly and simultaneously. What's your perspective on that? I mean, is that kind of how it would work? And how would that potentially make things better, safer, smoother?
So I think that's a really cool question for at least, again, two reasons off the top of my head. I think historically, when you look at the most earliest versions of this kind of autonomous driving, there was an idea that actually these vehicles would not be independent. They would somehow be in sync with each other to make driving much more efficient. So I think the more advanced forms of this autonomous driving will be exactly what you're talking about. These kind of a linked network of vehicles that collectively will be able to gauge risk and overall holistically make things maybe more safer. So I think there's definitely that component that exists. I think the second thing that ties into what you're talking about with respect to this binary, kind of this false dichotomy, right? Of like, it's like a binary code. It's either 0 or it's either
there's lots
1.
of information. It's not just either or.
Exactly. And so if you talk to people who operate in this space, either at auto manufacturers who are trying to go into autonomous vehicles, or on the software side, people who are developing the software, almost uniformly, they will tell you that, you know, it's never binary.
Yeah.
It's always multiple different outcomes and things that can happen. And, you know, kind of based on what we discussed just a few minutes before about AI and machine learning and deep learning, and, you know, this idea that these systems will go through multiple permutations on based on the data that's being input and historical data, as well as data that's coming in live. Then they look at what the different outcomes will be. And so what that tells us is that there will probably be multiple outcomes anyways, which is more reflective of reality, which gets to the criticism that a lot of people have about Trolley.